Let me start with a confession. I've never been really good at being told where my limits are. And if someone says, hey, this is as fast as it goes, well, my instinct has never been to nod politely. It's to ask, according to whom? And then start taking things apart and see what's actually possible. And those of you that know me know this well about me. Now, that mindset has gotten me into trouble more than once, usually because I didn't stop soon enough, though. But it's also carried me through some pretty extraordinary chapters of life. And that same instinct to question assumptions and test boundaries is the same mindset I bring to health. Because modern medicine has become exceptionally good at keeping people alive. And I want to say that clearly without sarcasm. If you're having a heart attack, a stroke, a serious traumatic injury, there's no system on earth that's more impressive. And I truly believe that. It's one of humanity's greatest achievements. But here's where things make me a little frustrated. We've become incredibly skilled at extending lifespan, while quietly getting worse at preserving vitality, resilience, and joy along the way. We've learned how to keep people breathing, stabilized, and technically alive. But we've also accepted, almost without question, that being tired, medicated, fragile, and limited is just part of the deal. Now, we've extended lifespan while steadily lowering our expectations for how good life is supposed to feel. We've focused on mastering survival, and somewhere along the way, we forgot to protect vitality. People are living longer than before, yet they're moving less, they're thinking less clearly, and structuring their lives around what they can no longer do. Chronic disease is not rare anymore. It's actually expected. And what concerns me most isn't just that this is happening, but that it's normalized. And so thoroughly that questioning this aspect, it seems almost naive. We've added years to our life, but in many cases, we've subtracted energy, we've subtracted curiosity, and most significantly, we've subtracted confidence from those years. And that's the part I reject. We've wrapped it up in words like aging, genetics, and hey, what do you expect? And I don't accept that. And if you're listening, I suspect that you don't either. But like I said, I've never been really good at accepting limits just because someone told me they were there. I don't see life as a straight line. I see it as a book of chapters. Some are calm, some are chaotic. And let me tell you, some require rewrites. But every single chapter teaches you something if you're paying attention. This podcast exists because I refuse to die slowly. And because I believe vitality is something you can actively build, protect, and refine over a lifetime, regardless of your current situation. Welcome, my friends, to the Vitality Manifesto Podcast. My name is Dr. Dwayne Jackson. I've broken nearly every bone in my body. I've torn more muscles than I can count, and been through a pile of surgeries that taught me anatomy actually from the inside out, often against my will. I've rebuilt myself again and again through disciplined training. I've survived kidney failure, dialysis, and a transplant, which is a very efficient way to develop a deep respect for recovery. And somehow, despite all of that, I've lived a life filled with curiosity, filled with experimentation, rebuilding, and a tremendous amount of joy. I'm a dad, I'm a lifelong athlete, I'm an educator, a scientist, an exercise physiologist, and an academic. I was trained at some of North America's finest research-intensive universities, including Yale School of Medicine. And in my most recent academic life, I was an award-winning scientist and a tenured professor of biophysics at Western University in Canada, where I served as the director of the A.C. Burton Laboratory of Vascular Research and the associate chair of undergraduate medical biophysics classes. In other words, I had a job that my parents could finally explain to their friends. For decades, my work lived at the intersection of stress, and adaptation. I've studied the autonomic nervous system, human performance, muscle physiology, neurovascular physiology, cancer biology, and even peptides. I'm an experimental microsurgeon, and I've developed advanced optical imaging techniques and novel experimental models for medical discovery. I've secured millions of dollars in federal research funding, published in high-impact peer-reviewed journals, trained clinicians, PhDs, postdocs, and taught physiology to thousands of undergraduate students. So yes, I know the science. But here's the part that makes me different from most people in my academic world. And I say this humbly, not dramatically. I've never stopped being an athlete. I didn't retreat into theory. I didn't outsource my health to spreadsheets. And I didn't stop testing what I was teaching, sometimes to my own surprise. I've never stopped training. I've never stopped experimenting. I've never stopped pushing my body to see how it would respond. And despite injuries, illness, and more than a few moments where common sense briefly left the room, I've never stopped having fun. I've never stopped living fully. I didn't just teach stress physiology, I lived it. I didn't just study adaptation, I forced it. I didn't just theorize about resilience, I needed it. That combination, evidence plus experience, is pretty rare in the health space, and it matters. Because knowledge without lived experience becomes fragile advice, and experience without evidence becomes reckless behavior. I've spent my entire life standing in that overlap, and that's exactly where this podcast lives. I grew up in a traditional grounded family. I had supportive parents, two incredible sisters, a real team. My parents owned an automotive machine shop. My dad built race car engines, like real ones, powerful ones. Engines designed to go very fast and occasionally flirt with self-destruction. Now, from the time I was 4 years old, I was in that shop, and I loved it. I loved the idea that you could take a system, understand it deeply, and then re-engineer it for more performance. More horsepower, more torque, better efficiency. But my dad always warned me. He said, "Hey, son, the harder you push an engine, the greater the risk of it flying apart. And if you want more power, you need better parts, better fuel, better cooling, and more maintenance. And if you drive it like you hate it, don't expect it to last." That lesson followed me everywhere because the human body works the same way, only it's even more fascinating. By my early teens, I began to understand that the human body has its own kind of engineering. It's intelligent. You can stress it, challenge it, push it, and instead of simply wearing it out, it adapts. It becomes stronger, faster, and more resilient. But just like an engine, there's a balance. Push it intelligently, and it upgrades itself. Push it recklessly, and it breaks. Neglect maintenance, and performance declines. Use poor fuel, and efficiency suffers. The difference is that, unlike an engine, the human body learns. Like I said, it's intelligent. That idea, adaptation under stress, became the foundation of my life, and I still live it today. Now, motocross came first, then bodybuilding, then academia, then self-experimentation. Always asking the same question. How far can this system go if you understand it, respect it, and work with it rather than against it? I've always loved pushing limits. Not recklessly, some would argue on that one, but with a lot of curiosity. I see injuries not as failures, but rather as feedback. I see setbacks as chapters, not endings. And I've never lost my sense that life, at its core, is meant to be interesting and fundamentally fun. When I eventually entered academia and trained at the Yale School of Medicine, twice because I really enjoy homework, I guess, I brought that same mindset with me. Science is structured and embedded in curiosity, at least good science is. Training is just applied experimentation. And life, if you're really honest about it, is one long self-experiment, whether you like it or not. The difference is whether you're paying attention. I've experimented on myself more carefully than most people ever will. Training methods, recovery strategies, nutrition approaches, stress exposure, hormones, supplements, peptides. Some things worked beautifully. Some things taught me some very clear lessons. And a few taught me lessons that I only needed to learn once. That's not really recklessness. That's informed curiosity. And yes, sometimes I did push too hard. Sometimes I had to rebuild. But I never stopped learning, and I never stopped enjoying the process. Now, there's another chapter of the story that I need to share, because without it, none of this framework I'm going to talk about really makes any sense. For a long time, my life followed what looked like a very traditional definition of success. I had tenure at a major research-intensive medical university, a federally funded laboratory, an academic title that people respected, a career in medical biophysics and physiology at the University of Western Ontario that I'd spent decades building. From the outside, it looked like I had really made it. And to be clear, I was deeply grateful for that career. Academia actually shaped me. It trained the way I thought. It taught me discipline, skepticism, and humility in the face of data. I loved teaching. I loved mentoring students. I loved watching young minds light up when physiology finally clicked. But something subtle had been changing. Not in a dramatic burnout kind of way, but in a quiet, persistent one. I had survived kidney failure, dialysis, and a transplant. And when you go through something like that, the noise in your life kind of drops away very quickly. You stop pretending that life is indefinite, at least your time here. You stop confusing security with alignment. I began asking myself a different question. Not, is this impressive? But is this how I want to spend the best years I've been given? And around that same time, life decided to remove any remaining illusions that I was in control of. Within a relatively short time span, my mother passed away. Not long after that, my father passed away. And then very, very soon after that, my younger sister and best friend suffered a catastrophic brain aneurysm. And then, to put the icing on the cake, my marriage ended. Now, I want to be very clear about how I say this. This isn't a story about being broken. It's a story about being stripped down. Loss has a very, very interesting way of doing that. It removes the non-essential. It really clarifies what matters. It forces honesty. And I actually didn't respond to those losses by withdrawing from life in general. I responded by paying closer attention to it. Because when everything is familiar and then all of a sudden it just falls away, you're left with a choice. Either harden or deepen. I chose to deepen. Now, at the center of that choice was the decision that I had to focus on fatherhood, and that was my daughter. I'm a dad to a younger daughter that is, without question, my carbon copy. It scares me a little bit, but it also makes me very proud. Same curiosity, same stubborn streak, same tendency to ask why many, many times. Becoming a father changed my understanding of vitality in a way that no textbook ever could. Because suddenly, vitality wasn't abstract. It was practical. It was about being present. It was about being energetic. It was about being patient. Being strong enough to show up fully, because I didn't want to just exist within her life. I wanted to be alive within it. I wanted to model what it looks like to engage with life, to recover from adversity, to stay curious, to treat challenges as chapters rather than endings. She didn't need a father who was impressive on paper. She needs a father who could play until he's 90 years old. And that's when I made a decision that on paper made very, very little sense to a lot of people, especially my academic colleagues. I walked away from my tenured faculty position, security, and everything else in medical biophysics and physiology at the University of Western Ontario. Not because I was angry, not because I was burned out, and not because I didn't believe in science. I walked away because I wanted my life to be more aligned with what I was teaching. I had spent my career studying stress, adaptation, and resilience, and I realized I wanted to live those principles, not just publish them. Now, like I mentioned, tenure offers great security, but it can also quietly ask you to defer your life. And after everything I had been through, I was definitely not willing to defer it anymore. So I stepped away, not from science, but from the structure I'd been living. We moved to the rainforest on Vancouver Island in British Columbia, Canada. And yes, that sentence still makes me smile because something remarkable happens when you place yourself in an environment that can constantly remind you that life adapts, regenerates, and persists. Tall trees, the Pacific Ocean, cold water, wild, wild weather, and silence when you need it. It wasn't an escape, although a lot of people do use this as an escape, but rather it was a recalibration. I built a life that prioritized health span over accolades, curiosity over comfort, alignment over optics. I didn't stop thinking deeply, but I did want to make sure that I was not focused on the wrong thing. I didn't stop studying. I didn't stop training. And if anything, I had finally found the space to integrate everything I knew. And here's what I learned through that. Vitality is not the absence of hardship. It's the ability to stay engaged because of it. Loss didn't make me cynical. It made me precise and focused. It showed me that time matters, that health is leverage, that independence is precious, and that we don't honor life by playing small or safe. We actually honor it by participating fully. And this is why the Vitality Manifesto exists. Not as a reaction to loss, but as a response to living. It's a framework built by someone who has studied the body at the highest academic levels, pushed it at the edges of performance, broken it, rebuilt it, and chosen to keep going with curiosity and joy. So this podcast is not about avoiding difficulty. It's actually about building the capacity to meet it again and again. Now, I sometimes joke that I didn't leave academia. I just changed laboratories. One had fluorescent lights, committee meetings, and grant deadlines. The other has trees, weather, uneven ground, and much stricter peer review processes called reality. And here's what the change taught me. When you strip things down far enough, titles, structures, expectations, you start to see what performance really is. When we're young, performance is easy to define. It's winning races, it's running faster, it's lifting heavier, it's jumping higher. Performance is external, it's measurable, it's obvious. But this is where people get stuck. As we age, many assume performance disappears, not because it actually does, but because they never update the definition. So instead of redefining performance, they quit. They blame aging. They lower their expectations. And slowly, almost unconsciously, they stop living the life they loved. That's the mistake, because performance doesn't vanish, it evolves. And what it evolves into is vitality. Longevity is just lifespan, how long you live. Vitality is health span, how well you live while you're alive. You can live a very long time with very little vitality. We see that every day, but that's not success. Vitality means strength, energy, clarity, resilience, independence. It means continuing to do the things you love at a high level for as long as possible. My bias is simple. We should aim to live to 100, doing everything we're capable of doing. And when that end becomes inevitable, the goal should be to go out independent, mobile, and engaged, not fragile, not institutionalized, not quietly disappearing. That's not denial, it's responsibility. This brings us to my Vitality Manifesto, which isn't a program or a protocol. It's a framework for living well across decades. Physical conditioning. This is your engine block. Strength, muscle mass, balance, and cardiovascular capacity are not optional if you want independence. Muscle is protective tissue. It stabilizes metabolism, it supports cognition, and it gives you a margin of error when life happens. Cognitive conditioning. Your brain is not a passive passenger. It adapts to complexity, novelty, and challenge. If you stop learning, stop problem solving, and stop engaging deeply, decline accelerates, not because of age, but because of neglect. Stress resilience. Stress is load. Load is information. The question is whether you recover. Stress resilience is about teaching your nervous system when to engage and when to downshift. Without recovery, even the best engines overheat. Nutritional wisdom. Nutritional wisdom is what I feel is one of the most important qualities. Nutrition is our fuel quality. You can't run high performance on low-grade input forever. Energy availability, protein sufficiency, micronutrients, and metabolic context matter more than ideology. Mindfulness. Mindfulness is your dashboard. Awareness tells you when something's off before it becomes catastrophic. A dysregulated mind always produces a dysregulated body. Social connectedness. No engine runs alone. Humans are cooperative systems. Connection regulates physiology, buffers stress, and supports longevity. We learned this during the global pandemic. Isolation is corrosive. Now, when we think of all these domains within the Vitality Manifesto, they don't work independently. They integrate. Ignore one, and performance suffers everywhere else. It's biopsychosocial. This podcast exists to explore how to live well for a long time. Every Tuesday and Friday, we'll dive deep into longevity and vitality, training and recovery, nutrition without ideology, hormones, peptides, supplements, stress mindset, and resilience. Conversations with world-class guests, no dogma, no hype, no shortcuts, just evidence, experience, and curiosity. Now, if you've listened this far, you're not here by accident. Now, subscribing isn't about supporting me. It's about staying connected to a conversation that will challenge you, inform you, and keep you engaged with your own life. This podcast isn't meant to be consumed passively. It's meant to be lived alongside and applied. Remember, gang, life is a fun book full of chapters. Some are fast, some are painful, some require rebuilding. But every chapter teaches you something, only if you're paying attention. So vitality isn't about pretending you're going to live forever. Vitality isn't about pretending that you're going to be young forever. It's about refusing to stop living the life you love just because the calendar keeps moving. Welcome to the Vitality Manifesto Podcast, gang. Let's see how far this system can really go.